Hello and welcome back to another week here at Just Gay Stuff Podcast. I am Jess.
And I'm Lauren.
And look, we've had a bit of a hiatus from interviews lately because there were some other really heavy topics that we needed to comb through.
And some fun ones.
Definitely fun. However, this week we are fully breaking the dry spell. It's over. It is finito because we have the absolute pleasure of welcoming, in my probably very biased opinion, one of the most greatest soothing voices to radio on our show today. We are introducing Mr. Blair Martin from Queer Radio on Brisbane's best radio station, 4ZZZ.
Hi, Blair.
Hello, Jess. Hello, Lauren. How are you? Good to see both of you.
Good, thank you. How are you?
We are fabulous.
I am well.
Everyone hear that soothing sound of Blair's voice. It just,
We were just talking about this a little bit before off the podcast recording, how funny it is that now we're on the other side, because Blair's interviewed us a few times on 4ZZZ.
I have.
He has. So Lauren and I have both been interviewed by you before, and in my musical projects, we've been interviewed many times.
Yep.
But I have to say, I'm very excited to be the one interviewing you today and asking all the questions and learning so much more about you that we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know how to avoid answering questions because I know how to ask them.
That's true. I was going to say that sounded very like such a true politician. I know how to avoid answering questions. Well, Blair, why don't you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got to be a part of the 4ZZZ family?
Well, my name is Blair, Blair, and I was born a very long time ago. My birth year is a year that is very much in the distant past. In fact, I am actually the same digits as my birth year now. Alas, not 19.
Wow.
Not 19, but 62. I will turn 63 this year.
I would not have guessed that.
Yeah, no, neither.
There we are. I am
not a day over 25.
I'm a
mentally
sexagenarian. As my 88-year-old mother keeps reminding me, just remember you're not as young as you used to are. You're over 60 now. Yeah, thanks.
They never let us forget, do they?
No, that's true. I use pronouns he, him, or they, them, by the way. So either or that. I identify as cisgender homo, but I don't mind the use of any form of gender neutral or male pronouns. That's fine. I identify as male, but they, them is also pretty good set of pronouns as well too.
It's excellent. And the word homo you've used, that's the best because that's what we're all about on this show and on your show, Queer Radio, which we have been a part of, like we said.
I was about to say, it just really kind of does what it says on the label.
Yeah, definitely. We don't want
Queer Radio ain't anything but.
We don't need any of these innuendos or anything.
No, well, I was going to say our podcast says what it is. Says what it is.
Yep, absolutely.
Did you come up with the name
We're
Queer
very
Radio?
similar. No, the name Queer Radio precedes my time as the coordinator of the show. The history of Queer Radio is long. So on the 30th of September 1992, 4ZZZ started broadcasting from the building we are currently in,
Wow.
which is 264 Barry Parade.
How old were you, Jess?
1.
No. Lauren, how old are you?
I was not born yet.
She was a thought.
So 264 Barry Parade, that current building was built somewhere in, I think, the 1920s or 30s. It had history as a mechanics workshop, but just prior to ZZZ moving in, it was the Queensland branch of the Australian Communist Party. It had its own interesting history. In the early 70s, someone tried to blow it up.
Gee,
wow.
They're actually, you may be aware we have feral neo-Nazis running around now. Well, they were still there in the 1970s. They haven't gone away. They're still there.
Yeah, we've slowly learned over doing some episodes that not a lot has really changed that much in
unfortunately
the space and time that we've been around.
No, so that had its history. Anyway, by the early 90s, the Australian Communist Party decided that world socialism would be achieved by other means, so they were downsizing, but they wouldn't let that building go to just anyone. Otherwise, of course, it would be knocked down and turned into some hideous capitalist enterprise that just destroys the landscape of the street. Mm-hmm. And they would only pass it on to an organisation they felt had similar ideals, and that was ZZZ, who were looking for a better permanent home. And that was the 1st of July 92, so a couple of months of work by the volunteers of the time, and the first broadcast could go to air from there. And Queer Radio was the second broadcast from that building.
Wow.
Not the studios as we use now, because they were still being built, somewhere very close to that.
Yeah.
And it was also Queer Radio's very first broadcast, because prior to that, there was a collective called Gay Waves. Now, that had gone back to the early 1980s, and with the move to Fortitude Valley from Toowong, the people that were part of Gay Waves said it's probably a really good sign to do something new. So there'd been long talk about providing a program strictly for female issues, and that was named The Lesbian Show. And then there was to be 2 other programs called Queer Radio. One was male-centred, and the other Queer Radio was everything. So Queer Radio was talking about trans, gender queer, intersex folk long before, I suppose, many people knew those terms actually existed. And that carried on for a few years. Dykes on Mics became the name of the Lesbian Show in 1996.
Wow.
And the 2 shows kind of solidified into majority female issues and voices on Dykes on Mics, and Queer Radio covering everything else. And I actually was broadcasting on there, I think 1995 I came in for an episode.
Wow.
I don't know how I got there.
You
I'm
don't?
not quite sure. But I remember going into Gay Waves when it was Toowong, in the brief period between the University of Queensland and Fortitude Valley. And I knew people who were part of Gay Waves. So I just kind of went in, I just remember just hanging around for one evening. And I think somewhere through all those connections of knowing people, John Frame, who was the long-term coordinator in the 90s and the 2000s, Gay Lemon, who covered both the Lesbian Show / Dykes on Mics and then Queer Radio, and Jeff Ward, who was on Gay Waves Queer Radio. I knew all those people. Thankfully, they're all still alive and they're all still kicking.
That's excellent.
They're all old, like me.
Yeah.
We have all aged. But
Gracefully.
It was... Yeah. But it was on and off over that period that I became part of Queer Radio. And go forward to about 2007, I met someone who became a business partner with me, Aaron Holloway. Aaron's a photographer, and I was able to help him get an exhibition at Brisbane Powerhouse for something that was on at the time. And I said, you should go and talk to Mark Jeffrey had taken over as Queer Radio coordinator after John had retired. And I said, you should talk to Mark, because Mark would often ask me, a guest has dropped out, can you come in tonight and talk about something? I was like, okay, I'll do that. Anyway, Aaron was invited to become co-host with Mark. And then in 2011, Aaron and his partner, now husband, Jarrett, moved to Germany. First to Bremen, they now live in Berlin. And in 2011, Mark just asked me, he said, okay, Aaron's going to live in Germany. Do you want to take his place? If he'd asked me about 8 months earlier, I would have had to say no. But when he asked me, I was at that point where I wasn't touring as an actor, as I had been for about half a dozen years before that. I was really at a point of, what am I doing next?
Yeah.
What's the next thing in my life? So 2011, I did my first co-hosting of Queer Radio proper, and there we are ever since. Mark left a year later to go and work for ABC Radio, and I became coordinator, and here we are, 2025. There's the story.
I think also once you did a little co-host segment, they were like, Blair, your voice is as smooth as butter. Do you understand how many ears you're going to grace with that voice? You cannot
I don't
leave.
think anyone ever said that, but...
Well, I'm telling you.
Jess is saying it now.
All right. Okay, Jess.
Even
All right.
when
okay.
Lauren and I left our interview with you, I was like, don't you think Blair's voice is just so perfect for radio? And Lauren's like, yeah. And I was like, yeah, see, I told you.
Yeah, my late father said to me once a very long time ago, when I first discussed or thought about radio as a career in the 80s, he said, well, you do realise you're too tall for television. Because I am, 193 centimetres.
Is that actually a thing, though?
No.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I was waiting
He's
for him
pulling
to,
my
I
leg.
was waiting for him to pull your leg and be like, yeah, I wouldn't fit in the TV.
I have had experiences on television where other people have had to stand on boxes
Wow.
to make themselves look like they're the same height as me. It really damaged, in one particular program I was on, it really damaged one poor fellow's masculinity.
Oh,
that
no.
he had to stand on a riser, and I'm standing on the studio floor, and I said,
Oh,
Oh,
well,
wow.
I'm
I'm tall, you're not.
152 centimetres, so I know exactly how that feels.
ah, way down there.
Yeah.
Way down there.
On the low beam. Well, it's funny because we were talking about learning all these things about you, and I didn't even know you were an actor. So what can you tell us about that?
Acting is a career where you are out of work 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to accept that.
Yeah.
The old phrase is 100% of equity is out of work 90% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's what it is. And you always just keep looking for things to do. And I wanted to do stage, I wanted to do musicals. I mean, I sort of, moved between one thing and another. I studied VCA in Melbourne, NIDA in Sydney, didn't get into those in the late 80s. But by then I was getting older and perhaps not as acceptable to do study. And I was just told, can you just go and work? You have the opportunity to go and find work and perform. And that's what I did. And I worked with people who gave me that sort of education. And doing improvisational theatre at Old Le Boite on Hale Street across from Lang Park, played theatre sports. And that taught me how to improv, how to be able to do things, particularly what you have to do as a radio
I was going to say that improv would have helped the
without a
radio
script.
host. Yeah.
Yeah. I was once doing a radio show, not Triple Z, there was around 1999, 2000. There was a period where what was then the Australian Broadcasting Authority was allowing test broadcasts on FM channels that they were going to sell off, which became 97.3, the commercial radio station in Brisbane, KISS now, I think it is.
Yeah.
And they had various programming groups, and I got in with someone there, knew someone who knew someone. And I remember I was doing program stuff, and this young person who was part of that collective of people watched me, and I'm talking my own, and I played music, and he just went, "You said all that without a script. You were just talking, and it made sense." And I went, yeah. Yeah.
You're like, appreciate me.
But that's the sort of thing. It's perhaps in my DNA. You want to know all these things about me that you don't know. Well, one of them is my name. I'm the oldest out of two. And my parents were married in 1958, and my mother worked as a secretary for a firm of architects in Rockhampton, Darrinbal country, which is where I'm from and grew up. And the architects were doing some work for ABC, doing some, I think, studio improvements, renos, stuff like that. So she went down there with some paperwork, plans, whatever, and was introduced to a young man from Brisbane who was on secondment working there. This chap was bald. He had dark blonde curly hair, piercing blue eyes, and the most mellifluous voice you could imagine. As a very young person, I saw him a lot on television because he became ABC Queensland's newsreader that we'd see at 7:00. And all the time, particularly my grandmother, my mother's mother, would say, "That's who you're named after." And his name was Blair Edmonds. And so I knew this person. I knew who he was. And then the 80s, he was doing radio on ABC Radio. He was the morning host. He had quite a following. Particularly, he was a very good cook. He did cookbooks and all this sort of stuff. He was very, very popular. He was also very gay. And in the 1960s, obviously, being out and being gay was just not possible. So he married, had a son. And I was working in the 80s at sadly no longer there. Thank you, Anna Bligh, for knocking it down. The Hoyts Regent Cinema Complex. I worked there from 80 to, when was it, 86. And the Aromas coffee house chain actually started their commercial operation or retail operation, I beg your pardon. They were already doing commercial stuff. But as a retail coffee shop, they took over the coffee shop that was in the foyer. And so I became a coffee snob in 1984. And the manager of that little shop, her name was Lizzie, and she was dating his son. Wow. It was the spitting image of him as he was as a young man. And I just told her that story. She said, "Oh my God, I've got to introduce you." And I said, "Oh, for God's sake, don't do that. It's embarrassing. There's a 22-year-old running around who's been named after him." Anyway, was introduced at a social function to him, and he became very friendly with me. I did have a friend say, "Do you think people are now thinking you're his latest boy?" And I am as naive as anything. And I was like, "Oh no, it's definitely not like that." Look, it might have been, but I never even noticed if there was any suggestion. But it would have been a bit weird, I think. It'd be the same if someone was named after me. I wouldn't be thinking, "Oh, right, I'm going to bang you now," because that would be fun. But, oh, God, no. But he was very kind. He gave me some tips. He helped me get a voice reel, as we call it, done. And I played it for an old uni friend of mine just so that she could give me feedback. And some of it was news report stuff, news thing. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm actually listening to this as if I'm listening to the news."
Well, I guess that's the best kind of feedback you could get.
Yeah. I haven't given you the feedback. I'm really sorry. And many, many years later, I did a short film where they had to film a newsreader in the background reading news, and it was filmed at the old ABC studios in Geelong. And the chap who did that recording, he said, "You definitely are an ABC newsreader."
Yeah.
So, in the old style. So really, ending up on Queer Radio is
destined.
It was inevitable.
Destiny.
Yeah.
Absolutely inevitable. Yeah, absolutely.
And then being queer, also destined.
Yeah, I was going to say, speaking of...
Yeah, I still don't know, Lauren, if my mother has ever worked it out. Blair Edmonds, sadly, he is no longer with us. He actually died in the 80s. I believe he had a stroke.
Aww.
And that took away his speech, which greatly, obviously, shattered him. And I think it's just those things when people lose stuff that is so important to them, the will to live just dissipates and away you go.
Well, it was his livelihood.
Yeah.
Livelihood, broken heart and all that sort of stuff. I mean, when people say you don't die of a broken heart, you actually do.
I beg to differ. You definitely can die of a broken heart. Yep. I agree.
Thank you for agreeing with me.
Speaking of history and homos
and your growing up life,
what was your self-discovery journey like?
Very interesting. Because growing up in central Queensland in a period where, yes, being gay was illegal, any whiff of that would not just have you ostracised or beaten up, which, certainly happened for me at school. I was harassed. In fact, I would have tagged as being gay before I knew that.
Yeah.
And I went to probably the last single-sex school in the state school system in Rockhampton. It was Leichhardt Ward Boys State School that closed in 1986, and it had existed since 1905. So I went grade 1, grade 2 to the hall, girls and infants, and then grade 3 in 1970, go round the corner to Leichhardt Ward. And, of course, that's all boys. Now, I had no idea of sexuality. I had nothing, zero understanding of any of that whatsoever. But I was tagged because I had red hair or auburn hair. I was sensitive. My voice didn't break. Now, you'll be surprised about this. This did not break until much later than many of the others.
Wow.
And one day, it was a kind of cold, wintry sort of day, and one of my classmates, we all wore shorts, his legs just broke out in, goose pimples. And I was fascinated by it. And I just ran my hand over, as you do, totally innocently. That tagged me.
Wow.
As a poof. Wow. And that went all the way through high school. So that jumped over to, go to Rocky High. It went to that because I did library monitor. I was in the school musicals. I didn't have a girlfriend per se. I had a strange first name. I was tagged as being gay before I was.
Yeah.
However, I did have one friend at school who was also gay, and he was my first sort of experience. It was still very much, it wasn't full on bang, let's go to every section of the gay Kama Sutra.
Yeah.
It was bit by bit
Yeah.
over about 3 or 4 years, from about the age of 14, just bit by bit learning. And of course, I have this whole, religious guilty sort of thing. Oh, God, I don't know, I shouldn't, but my God, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's
Exactly.
real, you're fighting with yourself over that. And many years later, I realized that I had an earlier experience, or not an experience, but an earlier awakening. But the problem is, when we're very young, we don't have the language. We simply don't have the comprehension to understand the stuff about us.
Yeah.
We don't know because you can't.
Yeah, exactly.
And I wouldn't expect any 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old to say, oh, I understand I'm gay, or no, that's not that I won't say it's not possible, but I wouldn't expect that.
Yeah.
Sure, if some of them are particularly precocious, well, fine, let them understand that in their own way. It was many years later, I was chatting to someone about favourite types, and I mentioned, oh, I really love the surfy type. Love blonde hair. I love that whole thing because it was everything I'm not. I've got red hair and freckles. I go out in the sun, I fry like a crisp in
Same.
5 minutes. Which is good now, of course, because my features are fabulous.
Yeah.
I'll be 60, 70 and I still won't look old. But this chap said, oh, you'd love Luke Halpin then. And suddenly that name just went ding in my head. And I thought, this is why I love the name Luke. It's not Luke Skywalker. It's not St. Luke, because that was my parish church as a kid. It's this boy in one of my favourite TV shows. Luke Halpin played Sandy in Flipper.
Oh,
wow.
And Luke Halpin was the Zac Efron of his day.
Yeah.
He appeared 9 times out of 10 in that show and nothing more than denim cutoffs. He was beautiful.
He was your gay
absolutely
awakening.
good. He certainly was, but I did not know that. But it was there in the back of my mind. And also the actor who played Bud, the younger brother, I had seen in magazines, because we only had black and white TV. I'd seen in magazines that this lad, he was a redhead with freckles. So obviously there's this subtle way of saying, oh, that's me, and this older person. Now, my own preference, I tend to like being the daddy and things. So men older than me aren't quite my partner type, Whereas I just like being, and also I'm a Cancerian, that's the mother figure.
Oh, yeah.
So I like being the one who looks after people, and I like the one who cares and nurtures and does that. So Luke Halpin was the boy that made me gay.
Wow.
Quite probably.
That kind of works with this next question, because you were just talking about Luke Halpin being like, in a way, your gay awakening and sort of representation. But what did representation look like for you growing up?
Very hard because, again, Australia, and particularly provincial Queensland, Australia, is very backward.
Yeah.
It's very, very backward. I probably flatter myself by saying I was the first gay person my parents ever met. No, it wasn't, because I know there were people they knew, but it was never discussed.
Yeah,
and my
they would have
family
known
never
those people,
discussed it.
just not known they were queer.
Well, some of them they probably would have.
Yeah.
I do remember there was a chap who was a flight steward for Qantas.
Oh, yes.
Right.
And even my vague memory of this fella probably would tag, he was a screaming queen. But I wouldn't have kind of really known on that. And if I did, I probably wanted to shy away from it, because otherwise I'm expressing something that I shouldn't.
Tagged by association or...
Yeah, that sort of thing. So my growing up was totally, you just didn't have anything. But there were a few things that kind of twigged you along. There was, in the 70s, a magazine called Forum, which was highly naughty because it discussed sex.
Yeah, right.
Now, the editor of that, Bettina Arndt, is, well, in my view, a persona non grata, because she is quite loopy when it comes to some things with people. Very famous in Australian history as a sexologist, but I wouldn't say she'd be a person I'd go to it for advice. Well, one of her more recent outbursts is that Grace Tame, who as a schoolgirl was groomed and then abused, she takes the side of the abuser and saying that basically Grace Tame engineered all that.
That says
I'm
enough
sorry,
about a person.
a 14, 15-year-old isn't engineering anything.
Yeah,
They're not that smart enough.
So if you're an adult, you're like going, if you are engineering that 14, 15-year-old, forget it.
Yeah,
It's not
exactly.
gonna happen.
Exactly. You still have a choice to
Wait
make.
till a
in the
year
matter.
later and see. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's two choices. So there was that, which I don't know how I got my hands on it, but there were things that I still remember to this day that had, the reader's questions about that. So the beginning of understanding. And certainly I had my friend Mark, who left school at grade 10, but he stayed in Rocky, so we still met up occasionally. There was that experience level of, something. And then on the meta level, the way that you look at popular culture, Australia had number 96.
Yeah.
Now, my parents watched it. Well, of course, I was never allowed to watch it. But I knew there was a gay character in that. I knew that Joe Hasham played this character, Don Finlayson. And that was the first unabashed way of saying gay people exist, gay people are normal, gay people are there. And that sort of was part of that nurturing in a way, or being aware of that sort of understanding of representation. But the other thing that made me gay, and this is a bit of a joke, but it's actually not that much of a joke. 1975, Molly Meldrum on Countdown introduced a video clip of a band, and I saw that, and along with thousands of other young Australians, I just turned 13, I had my teenage awakening to pop music, and I became what I am still today, an ABBA fan.
Oh, yeah.
Mamma Mia, just completely, I went, oh my God. Even though I had other, there are other groups. I liked the Seekers. I liked a lot of girl pop harmony groups of the 60s and things like that. My mother sort of used to dance around in front of the TV to the Australian music show Bandstand. So I always have liked that sort of stuff, but that really made it. Now, if you're male and an ABBA fan in Australia, it's 9 times out of 10 you're gay.
Yeah.
There was another layer upon that.
But what is it about ABBA? What is it about them that you feel
The
gives
flared
you
pants,
that
queerness.
confidence to find yourself?
Because it's not threatening.
Yeah.
It doesn't threaten your masculinity. It doesn't threaten femininity. It presents enjoyable. It presents bright. It presents colour. And it's exotic. Sweden, my God.
True.
It kind of blends the two.
Now, even as ABBA developed and became more serious themselves, those of us who are the real fans, I think we grew along with that because they were talking about things that we understood. The winner takes it all, when all is said and done, the day before you came. Those later songs, we could sense what that meant in our lives. It still was showing you are free to be a dancing queen.
Yeah.
You're free to just revel in that.
And the queen was a guy in a dress.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly. And yes, I know too, 78, Mardi Gras and all that. I was not aware of any of that until I moved to Brisbane in 1980. And that's when I had my first experiences of meeting gay people my age and a little older, going to my first gay nightclub in 1982, and still struggling. I mean, I had platonic girlfriends. I had one platonic girlfriend, and it was still a struggle.
Yeah.
There was I didn't want to have sex with them.
Yeah.
I had no interest in having sex with them at all. I rationaled it as, oh, well, that's my religious upbringing, but I'm still sucking dick with my best friend. I'm still having fun that way.
Yeah.
And then 1984, I just went, screw all this. I went back to my first nightclub I went to, which was called the Terminus, which is Brunswick Street in Fortitude Valley. I think it's a titty bar and has been for some time now, sadly. But Tuesday night was student night, and it was free. In those days, you used to have to pay a cover charge to go into nightclubs. And yeah, Tuesday night was student night, no cover charge. That place was packed.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was packed. And that's where my gay journey began properly.
Do you think as well some of those suppressed feelings you're talking about with these platonic relationships, without that representation that you're seeing in front of you and social norms weighing so heavy, did that keep you in the closet as well?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly in Queensland under Bjelke Peterson, I mean, the repression of that. The one thing that I will always say, even though in Queensland we were heavily repressed and discriminated against, we never lost the light. The people who started the Queen's Ball and I are the same age. I think she looks better than I do. But she doesn't seem to age. She still looks fabulous, darling. The Queen's Ball and I, we run that same pathway together. But those people that started it, people like Dame Sybil on Thorndike and people who came after her like Toyda Wild, and those people just took no shit.
Yeah.
They just said, okay, we're not going to be pushed back. If we have to live half in, half out of a closet, we will. But times are coming when this will change.
Yeah.
I had my first Sydney Lesbian Gay Mardi Gras experience, I think, in 1985, when it was quite fun. You just literally rocked up and jumped in the parade.
Yeah, wow.
That's cool.
A lot different to now.
Not very different to now, I know, because I've had an experience as well, 2008, of being in the parade where, you know, you had to turn up at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon and then you're locked into the holding pen for 5 hours. So. But yeah, I had those experiences, and by the middle of the 80s, we were still, 4 or 5 years before decriminalisation came along.
Yeah.
97 in Tasmania, last state.
Well, that's right. 97 is the last state, yes. And now Tasmania is possibly the most progressive through those laws and situations that we have.
Wow. Do you have a favourite media that you feel has represented the queer community apart from queer radio?
Apart from queer radio, of course. But seeing where it's come from nothing to now, we do have quite a bit, still quite a bit to go. But what do you think has truly represented the queer community the best in your opinion so far?
I am going to sit with film because for me, film is where you can really explore relationships, you can explore connections, you can explore ideas. And I say that because one of my favourite films is round about 40 years old now. And it's called Parting Glances, and it's one of Steve Buscemi's first films. I think it's his first leading role. And Kathy Kinney, who went on to the Drew Carey Show. It is a film that unapologetically looked at gay relationships in New York City in the middle of the 80s at the height of the HIV/AIDS crisis. And it explored relationships, it explored love, it explored connection, it explored friendship, it explored family without any of the people who feature in the characters in that being related to each other. The closest is probably the heteronormatively married couple who have what we would now call an open marriage. It's not considered that way. It's just the way it's developed. So that Parting Glances to me is an incredibly important film. And I think over the years as we developed, and certainly in the 2000s, I became quite an avid collector of what I call gay films, for want of a better word, because I was wanting to find the films and the stories that didn't depict us as victims, that didn't depict us as sad, didn't depict us as helpless, depicted us as normal human beings with love, relationships, success.
Triumph.
It can happen. Triumph, thank you. Yes.
Absolutely.
I think for me, film, but I do understand in the last decade and a half that the expansion of television into streaming has allowed that to develop in another way. So film now is perhaps episodic stream television, which can expand over a longer time period. But I still think our visibility in film and to allow young queer people a chance to see themselves.
Yeah.
I hear it often from people I interview. I hear it from actors who are people of colour who say, until I saw X, Y, Z, I didn't know I existed or I could exist.
Yeah. We feel the same with people we interview.
Yeah, if you can't see yourself, then you don't know that you really exist in the society. Representation is incredibly important.
Yeah, it really is. And I know that we are on a time limit because you are a very important human and you have other places to go. But I would really...
And I know there's a whole list of questions you want to ask me, and I'm quite happy if you want to shot fire them at me. I've prepared my answers.
I think there's only two left.
I'm good at that too.
There's two major ones that we want to squeeze in this next 5 minutes. But going on the back of talking about that favourite movie of yours and it going through the AIDS crisis, and also talking about you going through your coming out journey in the 80s, how did the AIDS crisis and the poorly managed and how misrepresented it was by the media, how did that affect you as a gay man coming out in the 80s and coming to terms with yourself in the 80s?
I suppose one of the benefits of being young is you actually believe yourself to be invincible.
Yeah.
So the feeling of being, surrounded by hysterical mainstream media, tabloid media, somehow didn't have the effect on me that the same hysteria in 2017 around the marriage equality plebiscite did, because I was older and a little more aware of how serious things could be and just how vicious people could be.
Yeah.
And the echo chambers of social media as well.
Yes. Yeah, and that's it. Again, I think that's a wholly different thing. But I survived through the heat or the highest period of people being infected. How? I have a very fair idea, because the main way, or the main two ways that HIV was transmitted were a sexual practice that isn't number one on my list, and two, I was never intravenous drug user for social or party drugs. So those two ways, that didn't affect me. But seeing our community absolutely coalesce and find people to ally with us, that I think was the best thing that has made our community our community.
Yeah.
Because we might not have had the strength to bond together if there hadn't been something as devastating as that. But on the other hand, I am very aware of this as I age. Where are our elders?
Yeah.
They are not there in the main. Yes, there are fantastic people who are living with HIV, who have enabled through all the things they went through, which is testing on drugs and being put through absolute hell, have enabled us to live with this horrific disease, this horrific infection. But we are missing this entire group of people that should be there nurturing. So I have to step up. I have to, almost a decade before my time, be that elder that other people should be. So I think we developed an incredibly strong shield against the hate, the violence, and I think by literally standing tall and saying, you shall not pass, we will not back down, I think that turns so many heads. This whole belief of the old Mattachine society of the 60s about, if we just go about this quietly, if we just seem very normal, blah, 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 picket fence and all that, then it will happen. Yeah, it might take 50 years, but that's not good. As women's liberation showed us, as Black and coloured people's liberation showed us, unless you're loud, unless you're proud, unless you are willing to fight for your rights, they will not be given to you. And they will be taken away from you.
Yeah.
This is something I had to, in my first year of being a part of queer radio regularly, was facing the disaster that was the Campbell-Newman LNP government. And knowing, and people should still know this, quite a lot of those people who were there in 2012 to 15 are there now as part of the Crisafulli government.
Yeah.
In fact, some of the worst people of that government are still there. So I have to remind people back in 2012, they said, oh, it won't be that bad. Things have moved on. And I went, no. This is what these people are like. They don't change their opinions.
And if the world is anything to go off.
Well, it's just that they think that you're an easy target. That you will be soft. You will crumble. No, we don't crumble.
And just because we have something today doesn't mean we won't have it tomorrow.
No.
It can be stripped.
Yeah.
And it is such a fragile thing that we have, really. We had to fight so long just to get it. Yeah, it's worth protecting.
Well, I see. It's why I go back every week to Queer Radio, why I'm still there 13 years later. I mean, I'll be slightly flippant and say I'm not going to be, well, I could use Mark Hamill's line as Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi. I will not be the last Jedi. I won't be the last coordinator of Queer Radio at 4ZZZ. I'm not going to be the person that says, okay, I'm done, and there's nobody left to take it on, so it vanishes. I'm aware that things have a timeline. I'm aware that things have lives, and some things do need to go. But I don't believe Queer Radio has reached that. I certainly don't believe I've reached that. I've had wonderful people come in and be a part of the show, some for a short period, some for long periods. But my job, I suppose, is to be there to make sure that the voices of our community have a way of being amplified.
Yeah, likewise.
This is exactly how we feel.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why and the number of people that I've had the opportunity to interview who have been able to share their stories, people who are members of the community, right through to the famous who are entertainers, who identify as part of our community, or are strong allies of our community who say why they do the things they do. I mean, this is a privilege that I never take for granted.
Yeah.
Same.
Because as soon as you do that, you lose it. You lose any respect for what you do.
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect way to ask this final question. And it's a question that we're kind of asking all our guests this year. And that question is, do you like being queer?
Hell yeah. I mean, what else am I going to be? My brother?
Do you have one?
I do have one 6 years younger.
We're not listening. He's the oldest of two.
Oh.
Oh, my God.
Look.
As he did one day, this is the truth. He's 6 years younger than me. One day he's in the car with me and he said out loud, I know what it is like to be discriminated and oppressed because my wife is black and my brother is gay. And I looked at him and in my head I went, mate, it's no wonder people want to clock you. It's like, truth, dude. No, that's not what it is. I mean, come and live it.
You had that conversation.
You might have a different standing. But no, would I want to be straight and married because it's easier? Yeah, but I've had wonderful fun. I've met great people. I've had wonderful loves of my life. I'm not currently in that area at the moment. But I have got to places and seen things. God, I've gone to the Eurovision Song Contest.
That's insane.
I've gone to the gay games, the World Out Games. I've done these things that I wouldn't have done if I was heteronormative.
You've done the gayest of gay things, Blair.
That's cool.
Abso-flippin'-lutely.
To do another gay
and
thing.
I'm an actor. God, I get to play millions of different people.
You get to play straight people all the time, and I'm sure it's boring as shit.
Oh, God, yes. Yeah, well, that's why some of them have a little twinge of gayness about
And finishing the gay things off by being on a podcast.
Yeah, well, as I confused a BBC radio announcer in, I think, Manchester one time by saying I have a spare room at home with 36 different people in it. Like, what? Like, yeah, well, I've created all these characters. I create all these things. One was wildly gay, even though he probably wouldn't say he was, but he apparently was. The camp game show host, Sonny Spells. But, oh, my God, Sonny Spell. I know you're pleased to meet me. I know you're thrilled to meet me. That was Sonny's line. But no, it's being queer makes me different.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as a teenager or as a younger person, when I wanted not to be different and singled out, I beg your pardon, now I want to be different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be the same. It's like that fantastic exchange in Life of Brian. You're all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals. I'm not. It's like, no, I revel in the fact that this is me. And one part of me is a very proud gay man who loves dick. I don't know.
And ABBA.
I'll go and ABBA. But I'll give you another line from a film from Parting Glances. There's a young actor in there, and he was one of the boys I would crush on. I mean, he just was gorgeous, a gorgeous, preppy-looking boy. His name was Adam something or other. His character's name was Peter, and he works in a record store, and he talks to the lead character in the story, Michael, and Michael's asking him about being gay. He said, well, my parents looked at me when I was 16 and said, Peter, how can you choose this lifestyle? And I said to them, I didn't. It chose me.
Mm-hmm.
You get to being about 16, you look at your dick and you go, Dick, what do you like? And I thought, there back in mid-80s, I was like, yeah, that's what it is. It's literally, what do you like?
Yeah.
And that means whatever queer you identify as, everything from cis normative style sexuality through to ace, poly, everything. It is as you believe your truth to be. As long as you are not taking advantage of another person, as long as you are not harming another person, then that's your truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And love is
Live it.
love.
Love is love.
That's a beautiful way to end
Absolutely.
this episode.
Thank you so much for your time with us,
Yes,
Blair.
thank
It has
you.
been awesome to be on the other side of the table with you.
Sure has.
Yes, you got your chance to use some of your investigative questioning on me.
We did.
We did. We hope that everybody has had an absolutely fabulous time listening to Blair's lived experience. I know that I have,
I
because
sure have.
we have gotten to know Blair in a whole different way tonight, which has been excellent. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much,
Thank
Blair.
you.
Until next week.
You better remember to
Stay gay, motherfuckers.
Woo! Yay!
Perfect. Thank you so much, Blair.
Thank you so much for joining us, Blair.
Thank you.
I'm talking about, you're talking about, we're talking about just gay stuff.
Swearing, it's so old-fashioned.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Just Gay Stuff. Make sure to follow us at Just Gay Stuff Podcast on all your socials and write to us with your stories at justgaystuffpodcast@gmail.com.